All right. Oop, am I muted? No, we're good. Let's get started here. I'm Jake. It's great to meet you all. Um, this is I'm trying to remember the specific title of the session I gave it. I believe it's helping actuaries and spreadsheet users access Python. Maybe those words are in a different order potentially. But yeah, I'm excited to meet you all. Would love to make this session as interactive as possible. We have 22 people, which is like a perfect size for discussion and things like that. Um, but the goal of today is to talk about how spreadsheet users can access Python. This is a really important thing, I think, for spreadsheet users to be thinking about. The main pain points of spreadsheets that we try to deal with in the work we do is, and I'm sure you've experienced these things yourself, is that one, spreadsheets are slow. Two, they lack repeatability. It can be hard to create automation sometimes, which is something that Python is really good at. And three, um, you're able to access much larger data sets in an environment like Python than you are in the spreadsheet world, and there are tools popping up that help with that third one for sure, like Power Query is good for spreadsheet analysis on larger data sets, but Python is certainly the most flexible way to do things like that. I'll start with a question and then maybe I'll introduce my work a little bit more, but anyone here, actively engaged in bringing Python work, or sorry, spreadsheet work to Python? Is that initiative that any of you work on or do in your personal work? Um, Anyone have any experience with that? The one they want to shout out? I got a thumbs up from Mike. I take that as a yes. Uh,
Yep.
oh,
Hello. Am I audible?
yeah, you can hear you.
Yeah. So I use Python. I don't know coding, but some of my team members have created Python for automating stuff. So suppose if you want to extract certain fields from multiple data files, we
Yeah,
use Python. We use anything transformation from Excel to some different formats. We use Python a lot. So overall, like automating various tasks, Python is really, really helpful
nice.
to
And
us.
can I ask, when you say you use Python, what environment are you using? Are you using Jupyter? Are you using like a platform like Databricks? What does Python look like for your team?
Uh, so we use PyCharm.
Cool.
Uh, Yep. And we also use Studio Editor only very rarely, but yeah, we also use CMD. So there's a function if we write some code, we can just run it on CMD. So that is something which most of us use because we are not very familiar with Python. But yeah, PyCharm is the environment.
Awesome. And then Valerie, I think you said in the chat, no, but considering it next year as an option versus low code tools. I think it's a great segue into demoing some of the tool and talking about our work because the tool that I built is called Mito, which is an open source Python tool. So any of you could download it today and start using it if you wanted. It's free. It sort of kind of combines low code, like a spreadsheet interface, with the power of Python, customizable code, the ability to add in different extensions and packages that are available to the Python ecosystem. And then, of course, the automation possibilities that come with Python, and we'll get into all of that. So, cool to hear that you're thinking about it. And I think that you could even maybe today one takeaway could be that low code and Python can actually work together really well. So let me share my screen and pull up the tool. I have some slides and I have a demo. I think we'll start with the demo, and I'll do some slides later. So Pooja said, I do transformation, replicating things done in Excel in Python. Cool, awesome. That's like a big part of our work is helping people take existing spreadsheet processes and bring them to Python. And our interface that we've built is a great way to do that. So maybe just like a second of intro. Myself, I'm Jake, one of the founders of Mito. We're a small startup. We're a team of like 4 people, but we have a really big open source community around the tool that we've built. And then we also work with some of the largest banks, insurance companies, hedge funds in the world, and transitioning spreadsheet users to Python. So we've worked with these banks and taken thousands of analysts there and through our tool and through our training programs and things like that, made these teams Python first or much more Python centric than they were than spreadsheet centric as they used to be, which I think is a really important thing moving forward. Obviously, for accessing larger data sizes, for doing work faster, and for creating automations, and especially in the age of AI, Python, from what we see, is the language that people are going to use to interact with AI. So it's even more pressure to get business users working with Python, not just software developers and data scientists. So let me share my screen. And I can certainly, if people have questions, I can go into more detail about the work we've done and things like that. Give me one sec. Pull this up. And as I demo, there's a lot of functionality in the tool, and I won't have time to show it all. So please, with a group this size, it's perfect for if there's something specific to your workflows that's interesting, like point me down a rabbit hole, tell me to pause and slow down on something and go into more deep detail. Please ask questions as you see fit. And you're welcome to just, you don't have to ask in the chat. You're welcome to just turn your mic on and ask a question if you like. All right, give me 1 second. Thanks. Great. So, share my screen. All right, you should all see a Jupyter Lab environment. Does everyone see that?
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Sounds good. So apologies, this is probably very beginner info for some people, but we'll get into the tool really quickly. So Jupyter is a most common Python environment in the world. Jupyter Notebook, Jupyter Lab is a place where users can come in and write Python and run scripts that they've written, run automations, access data sets. It's an IDE for Python work. It's open source. You can download it for free today if you go online and just search download Jupyter. And we see it's really commonly used in large organizations and financial firms and insurance companies, et cetera, because it's really easy to get access to it. It's open source. Your data is not leaving and going anywhere. Obviously, platforms like Databricks and SageMaker are really popular as well because of the administration that they do for you, the hosting they do for you. But we see that Jupyter is really popular too. So what Mito is this. Mito is this spreadsheet interface into Python. So everything we do is going to look and feel like a spreadsheet, but it's going to write the equivalent Python every time we make an edit. So the first thing I might want to do here is import actually, I'm going to do a different import first. So in terms of importing data, we can do it in one of three ways. I think figuring out how to get your data from a spreadsheet or from another domain into Python can be a mental blocker for some people. It's often the first step. And if you get stuck there, you get discouraged from continuing to doing that work. So we can get it in one of a few ways. So I can import any file, so any Excel or CSV, I can one-click import that into the tool, and we'll see that you won't have to write any code to do that. I could also import a data frame. So if you're already used to using Python and you have some data frames already, data frames are the Python data structure. You can think about it like a table, but it's a Python table, and it's what you operate on. It's what your code, it's the data that your code is working on. You can import an existing data frame if you already have it, or you could have a direct connection to a database. I think this touches on what I said a second ago, but a lot of people struggle to get data into the environment and actually access the data. That can be a struggle for spreadsheet users as well. So a lot of what the Python tools that we like to work with, like Mito, really help that by allowing users to directly connect to an enterprise's data sources and not need to write any code to access it. Or we could do a custom import here, which is just another version of a custom database connection. So I'm going to start with that. And so this is a really simple custom connection. It's fake data it's set up for. But
things we can add to
oh, sorry. Q, I think you're unmuted. I don't know if you had a question or you're talking to someone else. But
No, sorry, I just joined
oh, all good.
Zoom, so
No worries. Good to meet you. Welcome. So I'm going to put in a fake username, fake password here. And then what I'm doing is I'm selecting a year that I want to work with. So this is 2022. I'll import that data and we automatically get the code that is the equivalent of doing this data access. But it gets written for us just by using this menu. So you can see how you can use the skills you already have to come in and do work with this data without needing to write the code yourself. The code will be generated for you. And this is all production ready code. This code is not generated by AI. So if you are skeptical of using AI for code generation, we do have some features that do that, which I'll get to in a minute. But this code is not, everything you do in the sheet is not AI generation. So you can trust the code is deterministic, which is not something that you get with AI. So we've imported the data. I'm going to import another data set as well. This is just going to be a CSV file, fund info. So a big way that Python is used in organizations that we see are successful with it, and a big pain point that it solves is, let's say you have some data in some, strewn about spreadsheets in your organization, and you have some data in databases, or in emails or stored in different drives. Um, how do you get those different sets of data into the same environment to work with them together, especially if one of those data sets is like 6 million rows and it doesn't fit super well in a Python in a spreadsheet? You need a place that you can have an open canvas environment like a spreadsheet, but to work on much larger data sets. That's what Python is really great for. It's a great place to bring different data sets together from your organization. And Mito makes that much easier by putting this spreadsheet front end on that. So I have these two data sets now. I have one from a database and I have one from a spreadsheet. Does anyone have any questions about what I've showed you so far, generally what it's like to access data in Python, or why you as an organization might want to do that? Hmm.
I have one question, and maybe you're going to get to this later, but
Please,
when
yeah.
you bring in multiple data sets, sorry, is my audio working?
No, I can hear you.
Okay, great. So when you bring in multiple data sets like this, when you want to do controls around this, I'm assuming you can use GitHub for that. Does that control around the overall file or the individual tabs, if you will, in here? Like if
Uh,
you want to do change management.
that's a good question. I think so. Um, I think the short answer is that it's only going to do controls around what you have in the file here, but in the Mito sheet here.
Mm-hmm.
But the longer answer is that you can import multi-tabbed files. So like you can import. I'm trying to think if I have any Excel SX files here. There you go. I don't think I have any good Excel like non-CSV files to show right now, but you could import a file that has 5 tabs or 10 tabs or 20 tabs, and each tab would appear as its own tab in the Mito sheet down here. And then you could do controls on all that at the same time. Does that answer your question?
Kind of. Just to give you like a clearer example, maybe that would be helpful. So like
Yeah, sure.
in this case that we're thinking about, we are using assumption mapping tables that get fed into our actuarial models. Those are actually going to be like split up. We're not yet sure of the granularity, but say they would get split up by assumption, so lapse, mortality, and you're going to have a number of these. We want some way to control them before they get into the model. We're considering using Python as the tool to manage that versus spreadsheets. But as far as controlling the version of the cell mapping tables, if we do it on a level of granularity of each individual assumption, it might be very difficult versus having like an overall version of the cell mapping tables, which was why I was wondering.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I'd have to get into the specifics, which I'm happy to do. Maybe we could ping afterwards and we could chat about it. But my hunch is that yeah, that's definitely doable. I mean, doing like versioning and controls like that in Python is a very common thing to do. I think
Mhm.
it doesn't matter that it's coming from a spreadsheet. You just need to make sure that all those tables get mapped over to Python as data frames. I think would be the important thing, which shouldn't be bad. Cool. But yeah,
Thanks.
yeah, no worries. I'll ping. We can talk about it. It's a good question. I think that yeah, some of the things that in this example are I think are definitely more beginner. So there's a lot more advanced things you can do in Mito, but I try to for these intro sessions keep it pretty straightforward. Um,
Hey Jack,
yeah, go
is
ahead.
is Ali? I have just one question about streamlining Excel based workflows.
Hmm.
how can you how can I say how can you approach this problematic when we have a process that relies on multiple Excel files?
That's a good question. So you can, I think, so there's like the Python way, and then there's like the Mito way, and there's a lot of overlap there. But generally in Python, you could have a notebook that is calling many different files and operating on them, and then spitting out new files or updated versions of files. There are lots of Python packages that read in Excel and then read out Excel and can edit Excel files in the cloud or in your local drive. There's a lot of Python's really good at programmatically touching different parts of your computer or your company's storage. Like that's certainly doable. As it pertains to Mito, you can import as many files as you want. So I was sort of talking about this earlier. So this is one database, and this is one like this is a database pull, and this is Excel file or CSV. But I could import. I mean, I'll just do the same one again as an example. But like you could. So now I have two Excel files in here. They're copies of the same file, but they could be different files. But so you could have 20 Excel files in here if you want. So the nice thing about Mito is you can bring in all the data together, interact with it all at once in one environment, and I'll show you in a second. You can merge files together and create new versions of the data sets, and then export that all back to Excel if you want. So you can download these as Excel files, or you can create code that puts downloading it as an automation in your Excel file. So the number of data sets or files that you're working with, Mito and Python generally are pretty agnostic with. Obviously, larger files you could run into memory and things could get slower. But the nice thing about setting up automations in here is that these automations can run on multiple files. And if let's say you set up an automation that runs on 5 files, files 1 through 5, you can then rerun that automation on files 6 through 10, or files 6 through 100. It's pretty easy to change the scope of how many files an automation is running on. That's not a very hard thing to do in Python. There was one more thing I wanted to say there, and I'm forgetting what it is. But yeah, it's a good question. Does that answer your question? I know I gave maybe a bit of a vague response, but do you have any specifics about that process that you were wondering about?
Yes, a little bit, because I'm wondering how Python could map the process, and how can he know what to do, what to execute, what to run first.
Oh, I see. Okay, so you're talking about like when it
Yeah,
comes to creating an automation,
yeah,
how does the end user know how to run that automation and what order to run components of that automation?
yeah, that's it. Yeah,
Yeah, it's a great question. I think so. The short answer is that, you know, if the best version of the automation and the way it's set up is that it's only a one-time run. It's like you click, the whole thing is defined as a function or an executable, and you run that, and it does everything in the order you've predefined. There definitely is the ability, though, to have granular pieces of that. So you have like part of a specific user-defined function that you ran that you want users to access at their discretion. So if it's at their, so I guess there's a few ways to answer this. So at the highest level, I think the best version of an automation is you, as the person who created it, it's set up in the order that you want it to be. Now that only works for an automation, and so it's just a one click and it runs the automation. Now that only works in automation where there isn't end user customizability. Like maybe user discretion is needed. Sort of, like could be some like last mile data cleaning as part of the process or something like that, and they need to pick the order in which things happen. If that's the
mhm,
case, what you probably want to do is create automations and then create them each as a function that the user can call. And there's in terms of doing that, we probably won't get into the specifics of that today. I'll show you a little bit of it, but happy to spend some follow-up time with you to show you more about what it takes to create multiple functions that users can call in order that they want. Um, but at a mental model level, how that works is you can either have those functions available to them in a Python environment. So the way we handle this, I was going to get to this later, but I think it's good to show. The way we handle this in Mito is we have custom functions that you can define. So if you've written Python code, and this is, I think, where Mito really enhances the Python process. If you've written Python code, if you know Python, I think a big struggle you have is, okay, how do I make the work that I've done in Python available to other people in the organization? How do I get them to access it, especially if they're not as comfortable with Python? So one thing we have in Mito is custom functions. So I'm going to add a column to the right here. These are the names of some portfolio managers. If I use this get email function, this is not a native function that comes out of the box in Mito or out of the box in Excel. This is a custom function that I wrote for my instance here. And what this function is doing is it's connecting to a database that has these names stored in it, and it's cross-referencing those names with emails of these users. So if I run this on these names here, and then I'll make this bigger. You can see that we're getting the emails for these people. So this is an automated process. It goes to the database and runs a lookup essentially of these names versus the emails and then returns them. That's a Python script that was written. So the way I'm surfacing that automation to the end user is by giving it to them as a spreadsheet function. So they can just call it with one click. Now that's the Mito way of handling that granular levels of automation. You could also just have it as a function, like this is a function here. This is a function here that the user could call as they're working in the script. That's the Python way of doing it. But then the last part I'd say that answer, and I'm going long because this is I think an important piece, is that applications like Streamlit or like Dash apps, which are Python applications, are a really great way. If you're building a process that's Python based, but you want to give end users the ability to define the steps of that process, I think that dashboards, Python applications like Streamlit or Dash, which you can use Mito in, and if we have time, I'll show a bit of that, are a really great way to do that because they don't have to worry about running a whole notebook. They just have to come in and select a few steps. And all of the steps are defined in Python. You can either expose that Python to the user or not. But yeah, I think there's no 100% correct way to do it to answer your question. But yeah, at the highest level, the best version of an automation probably is just a one-click run and it's got all the steps in it already. And maybe it's handling different cases even. I think part of the question you asked though, Ali, was about mapping, like how does the user, or maybe part of what you're thinking is like, how does the user define the process? Like maybe they have the Excel process and they want to figure out how to bring that process into Python. That's one of the things that Mito is good for, especially on a spreadsheet level, because we actually have spreadsheet formulas in the tool, which is the next thing I wanted to show. So for example, if I add a column to the right here, I can do a really simple formula like this times 10. And that will create a new column and a new formula. And if I come down here, we'll get the code for this formula here. And you can see that all the code is also auto-documented as well, which can be really helpful. Excuse me. Can be really helpful for giving a record of what's going on. And I think this is definitely, just on the documentation piece, this is definitely a benefit of Python over Excel. If you get an Excel file from someone, really hard to understand, okay, what actually went in here. You can use like the trace function. I hate doing that thing. Get these like little line graphs to try and explain what's happening. I've never enjoyed doing that. Python's great. It's much more linear, shows you step by step what's happening. You can have written instructions for each step. So definitely, I think a benefit of using Python over Excel. And at more like at a business level, like this is much better for auditability. Much more error. You can do error detection based on this. And it's much harder for things to fall through the cracks in this kind of process than in an Excel process. But so this was a really simple Excel function, but we could do add another column to the right here. We could do something more complex. Like let's say we'll use an if statement. I want to say if this is greater than if this is greater than 3, return 1, otherwise, or we'll say return yes, otherwise return no. Cool. And if we scroll down, we should see, cool, yes and no there. So that's like a more, and you can see the function up here. and we could do nested functions. We could do, anything you're doing in Excel, you could do here. We don't have every Excel function. Part of the reason is because Excel is always adding new functions, so we can't, 100% stay up to date. But I think we got something in the chat. One second. Okay, Valerie, I will come to that in 1 second. Um, yeah, we have most of the functions that we have most of the functions that people are generally using, and the list of functions that we do have, um, we've built it sort of in collaboration with a lot of these banks. So we're banks and insurance companies. So we're always making sure that we're handling the use cases that are required. Okay, Valerie said, how do you trace more complicated logic here, like nested if, index, VLOOKUP, statements, and the like? Does this make it any easier than Excel? I see that you can do them, but is it an, any easier to trace? It's a good question. So the answer about how you do them is, and I think you kind of just said you could see that, but you could write nested. You could make this, and I could put this. Oops, this is uh equals if, and then I can put, this isn't going to make a ton of sense, but I can nest as much as I like here. Yeah, Scholar, I'll show the pivot in a second. Yeah, you can nest functions as much as you like. In terms of is it easier to trace this than Excel? It's a good question. I think so. What you'll get is the Python function for it, and you'll get auto-documented code for it. So I do think at a high level, yes, it is easier to trace each step by step. But then the question is it easier to trace within one step? Like, because if the formula is doing a bunch of things, how do you trace within that? I think what you don't get. Yep. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, please.
Sorry, I was just going to say this is from a review perspective. So, like, if someone puts together this for me and I want to take a look at it and see if the formulas are working correctly, like right now, this is something that in Excel is painful to do. So
Yeah.
the question is like, what would be the best way to do it in this tool?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think the answer is you would want to set up tests on the notebook as a whole. We probably won't have too much time to get into that today, but certainly would be happy to chat later and talk more about it. But I think where you're right is that I think like just from like if someone passed you this and you're not as comfortable with Python, like it's true that it might be easy because Excel does give you a bit more visual, like the different cells and columns that are being affected will highlight. So if that's the process of review that's comfortable for you, which I certainly can be painful, then the review process might actually be more comfortable in Excel. But if you're a user, if you're comfortable reviewing code and running tests on code to make sure that certain things are passing, which is much easier to do in Python than in Excel, then I think it is easier there. But it probably won't have time to get into too much detail about test creation and passing and failing on this session. But I would say at a high level, definitely, I think it's something that Python is much stronger at than Excel.
Uh, just one small thing to add related to audit perspective.
Yeah, go ahead.
Uh, I think this one looks much more easy because it states the column name instead of still referencing A, B, 11, and then you have to understand, okay, what's the column A represents, what's the column B represents.
Yeah.
A lot of time people just use the standard table. They don't use the Excel table functionality, which does what exactly it's being used right now. So in that case, this looks to me much easier.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
I think it's a good point.
just wanted to.
I agree with that. Arpit, are you using Python in your work currently for like migrating spreadsheet processes or running tests on processes and things like that?
We use it for migration purposes from
Okay.
like data migration, assumption migration, but not for audit as of now.
Makes sense. Um, yeah. Also, if anyone else has any response to Valerie, things that they've done in terms of running creating tests, you're welcome to share. Don't let me dissuade you. Okay. So yeah, we can do functions. Let's see what we're doing on time. Okay, we have like 20-ish minutes left. I would love, so yeah, we'll move to some of the more like I guess there's a few things I want to share. So another thing, so we were doing an operation on this column, but let's say I want to I can apply a filter as well. So these are just some simple small things, but I think important to show. So for example, I only want to look at the values greater than 3. Okay, it lets us know it removed 13 rows, and if we filtered through, we would see it's only 4 through 6. I could also check this by coming to the unique values here, and it'll show me, okay, 4 through 6 is what's available. And then if I were to get rid of this, we'd see, cool, we have 1 through 6 back. And also we'll see the filter / removal of a filter reflected in the code as well. So I'm only looking at things greater than 3. We'll know that the column filtered because this purple icon will be highlighted. And if I come down here, we'll get the code there. And if I remove it, the code will disappear. So the code down here will always reflect the most up-to-date version of what's happening in the sheet. I think an important thing to call out about the generated code, and this is a question we get a lot, is that the generated code, so everything we do in the Mito sheet, this interface here, which, this is just a one-line pip install, by the way, so open source, anyone could use it if they want. What we do here generates code below, but it only goes one way, and that's because of the way notebooks work and the order in which you run things. So if you edit this code down here, like if I deleted the section here, that would not live reflect in here. I'll show you, and the reason for that, like I said before, is because in a notebook you want things to run top to bottom. So if you have cells below that are editing things above, you can get yourself stuck in a really weird state sometimes. So we used to have that and got rid of it because it was messing up users. But you can edit this code. This is all real Python code that you can edit. I'm actually going to open a new notebook really quickly just to start from here. So I'll call the Mito sheet. You don't have to write any code to call the Mito sheet. You just click this button here. Once you have the package installed, that button will be there. I'm going to import that fund info again. And let's move to making a pivot table. And then I'll show you, I'll come back to what I was just talking about. So I'm going to make a pivot table. I want to look at, there's all these regions, and I want to look at what the average risk level is per region. So I'm going to make a pivot table. This one, come back here. And I want to look at region, and then I want to look at risk level, and I want to look at the mean risk level per region. Okay, great. Really simple pivot table. And now if I come down here and I run this code, so you have to run the code, which is just either clicking this button here or hitting Shift plus Enter on your keyboard as a shortcut. The running code like effectuates the code, means the code is now part of what's happening in this script. So if you run the code, and then if I were to call pivot table here, sorry, it's called fund info pivot. Sorry, fund. Actually, one thing you could do as a trick, you can rename these to make them shorter. Let's just call this pivot. And we'll see that the code for that is there. So now if I got to run this again because there's new code, if I call pivot here, we'll see that we get the pivot table in a new Mito sheet. So this is set up for those of you who use Jupyter already. This version of Mito is set up that the default data frame output is changed to Mito. So you essentially have a interactive data frame output. You don't have to do that. You can set it so you only get a Mito sheet when you call it. But so what you can do is you could edit this code if you want, and then the edits would be reflected in a Mito sheet called further down. But these edits would not be reflected up above. Any questions about that? It's a bit more of a tangent for people who are more advanced with Python and would want to be editing the code, but happy to answer anything about that if people have questions. Let me come back to the chat for a second. Cool.
Quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
How easy is it to change the data? For example, I took a spreadsheet, do some analysis and everything. Next quarter, my data gets updated. I have a new spreadsheet. but I don't want to do the analysis again.
Yeah.
Can I just simply change the data? How easy or hard it is?
Yeah, it's a great question. So yeah, that's sort of the last, or I want to show all the AI stuff functionality. So we'll probably get, I think right now, I'll get to that in about 2 minutes because
Sure,
I think
sure.
it's a really important piece. I quickly want to show just some of our merging functionality and then the graphing quickly. So we made this simple. Any more questions about pivot tables? You can make much more complex pivot tables than this. This is a simple one. You can have filters, you can have multiple rows and columns and values, but I know someone was, I think Skylar, you were asking about pivot tables. Any other questions on that? I got something in the chat. Cool, sounds great. Okay, so we made that pivot table, and again, we have the code for that pivot table. Um, So now let's say I want to merge this back into this data set. So I have this risk level mean. So for every region, I want to have that merged back in. So I could just come to merge horizontal. And here we can do mergers that we're used to doing in Excel and also in SQL. So we have like a lookup style merge, like a VLOOKUP merge. You can also use the VLOOKUP function in here, and you can do that cross sheet. So if I do equals VLOOKUP, I could do a VLOOKUP within here, but also call to different tabs if I wanted to do that. Or you can do that merge. I gotta redo this. You could do that merge in the merge menu. So I'm joining. I'm gonna put fund info over here, fund info over here, and I'm gonna put pivot here. And it should automatically detect what I want. Yeah, exactly. So it knows what rows we're going to match on as region to region, because those are the rows that match between. It can detect that because the names are the same. If the names aren't the same, you can set the match keys yourself. But this is a lookup. I could also do a left join, a right join, inner join, outer join, unique and left, unique and right. If you've done any SQL, you're used to doing these. These are really powerful ways to bring data sets together. In Mito, you don't have to write SQL to do them. You can just select them and you'll get the code generated for you. And we can decide what columns we want to keep within the merge. Here, I'll keep them all for now. But here we have this risk level mean um, merged back into the data set here. And this is by region. Yeah. Okay. So, and now if I come down here, I get the code for that merge down here. Any questions about merging or joining data sets? I think before questions, the thing I'll say is that this touches on that really important use case of I have I have some data in a spreadsheet, I have some data in a database, or I have data in two different spreadsheets, and I need to either combine those data sets together or actually do checks on those data. Reconciliations is a really popular way we've seen the tool work with audit, with actuaries. I think it's a really great Python use case. If you're starting to bring Python to your team, reconciliations is a really great place to start. And I could definitely, we do a whole hour session on that. So if you have more questions about reconciliations in Python, I could definitely spend some time with you and talk about it. But essentially that is an example, data in a spreadsheet, data in database. I want to cross-reference those against each other, see what passes and what fails, and generate a report off that. Really easy to do in Mito and automate that process. Like for example, okay, one way that might work is just imagine that these values, they're not, but are supposed to be equal. So I could just use an if statement here that says oops, if this equals this, return yes, otherwise return no. Oh, oops, gotta use the double. Okay, cool. So what we're imagining here, and I'm sort of throwing in another demo in the middle, so just to explain it, imagine we've got this data, this pivot data was data from a database, and this fund info was data from a spreadsheet. And on these, I brought in a column from one to the other so we can compare the two files against each other, specifically this column. And we were hoping that these columns were going to be the same, but they're not. And so this column here is a report showing us for every row, do they match, do they not? Obviously, in this case, none of them are going to match. But then what you might do as a next step is do some conditional formatting here. And I'm going to say on that column that I created, if I could put a condition here, if it equals no, then make it red. Oh, oops, hold on. Do here, where? Oh, it has to be string contains. Okay, Trinket days no equals red. Sorry, okay, this is an update. I think I must have said it wrong somehow. But essentially, you can use conditional formatting to make a test that either showing pass or fail. So really common use case for Python, especially for audit teams, audit teams, actuaries, financial services companies we work with. So happy to show more of that. So that was merging. I'll quickly want to show graphing, and then let's get to the automation piece. So let's say I want to make a graph off of this. Mito has this entire graphing studio here. Oh, this isn't loading. Hold on. There we go. So Mito has this whole graphing studio here. This is all using Plotly. Plotly is a really great Python graphing library. It's definitely one we recommend. It's very interactive, which we really like. So you don't have, but I would also say writing, even if you're pretty advanced with Python, writing the code for creating visualizations in Python can be pretty brutal to do it yourself. So Mito makes it really easy. We can customize this as much as we like. I don't have time to get into too much, but you could change the colors, the headers, different types of graphs. It's really supposed to be like the Excel graphing menu. So these are all graphs you could do in Excel. You could do them all here in Python as well. And then we can export this. So there's a few ways we can do it. So we can copy the code for this. So I'm going to run this. And then if I run this cell here, we'll actually get the code that we generated. So this is the equivalent code for the graph we made. And we'll get that code within the notebook. It's that graph within the notebook itself. And this is fully interactive as well. So, and this isn't tied to the Mito sheet at all. This is code you could use. You could send this code to a colleague and they'd be able to use it without having the Mito sheet. The graphing code is really flexible like that. You could also download it as a PNG. Maybe you want to put it in an email or a PowerPoint or a Word doc or an Excel file, or you could copy the code that creates an HTML file. So essentially what that will be is a little web page that just has this. So it's a really simple dashboard, actually. It'll have this interactive chart here that the user could come and look at. It's just a HTML file that you give them, and then they can load it into their browser. Okay. I'll stop there. Any questions about merging, pivoting, graphing, things like that? Cool. Okay. There's two things I want to show the rest of the time. So one is let me just see how many people do we might have a question. Hold on. Cool. All right. Thank you, Skylar. I want to show rerunning and then I want to show AI functionality. So, all right. The first thing I want to show here, someone had the question of like, okay, I've created this process and I did it for this quarter. I don't want to come back and do this entire thing again next quarter. How do I use this on the new version of the data? And so there's multiple ways you can do it. So at the most beginner level, if you're not interested in much as touching the code, you basically want to use this interface to create spreadsheet operations in a more flexible way that can handle larger data sets, that it's a bit faster. That's totally great. It's a great way to use Mito. All you have to do is change the import. So I would replace this with, actually, I don't know if I have the second version of this data set, but I would replace it with, imagine this is fund info 2. You click update and it reruns the process on the new version of the data. So that was fund info, and I could replay that on next week's version of the data, next month, tomorrow's. I could replay it on last year's version of the data, next year's version of the data. Really easy to take this process and run it on a new data set. It's just 2 clicks of a button. Any questions about that? Does that make sense, what we're doing there? Just to make sure that's clear, it's an important piece. Any process you set up here is automatically an automation because of the generated code. So all you have to do is just decide what file you want to replace the base file with, and it will run on that new file. That's it. There's also more advanced versions. So you can do things here like configure code. So this code I have written here, it's just some raw Python right now. It's not a function. So if I come to configure code and I say make it generate function, we'll see this code changed, and now we've defined this function here. And so now this function has all of this in it. And if I were to call this function and put the name of, this is for someone who's probably already using Python, put the name of the new data set or the data frame that I'm running the function on here, it would run all of these steps on that data set. So anything we do here can be automatically turned into a function with a click of a button. And we can also do schedule automations through GitHub and things like that if we want to have this run on a cadence. Won't get into too much detail on that, but if people have questions about it, please, you can ping me after. I'll give you my contact information and go from there. Okay, the last thing I want to show is our AI functionality. So I'm actually going to open a new notebook again. And let's open a Mito sheet. We'll bring in that fun data again. Okay, I have this information, this fun data here. So, so I'm working in this cell right here. The AI functionality I want to show you here, it's important to note that it's not, it's technically a separate package, so it's actually not tied to the Mito sheet. So you can use this functionality without the Mito sheet. If you don't kind of interested in the spreadsheet interface, cool with us. You can use this AI functionality as well. Excuse me. So let's open this. And so now let's say I want to, instead of defining something in Mito or writing code by hand, I want to say delete the region. Sorry, I'm a bad typer, especially when people are watching. Delete the region column. Cool. AI is going to write this code for us, let us review it, and then I could apply it. And it's if you click apply, it's going to apply it to the cell that we're in. And then I can accept it by hitting Command Y. What you saw there with the red and green is diffing, so it's not as helpful in like a simple example like that, but you could use the AI to edit like a big chunk of code you have. And if you do that, it's going to show you in green what the new code that the AI is adding is, and in red, it's going to show you the code that it's going to delete if you accept it. And so now if I run that, and then I call fund info again, we'll see that the region column is gone. So that's a very simple example. You could use it for like really simple operations like that. You could do something more advanced. You could say, help me do some simple ML on this data set. It's going to take a second. It's going to write all this code for me. I'll apply it. I'll run it. It's running. Oh, cannot convert string to float index. Okay, interesting. So it got an error. So this is a good opportunity to show this as well. So we got an error on that. The code's not perfect. As any AI tool you're going to use, it's going to run into errors. We have a feature that's nice, which is any error you get, whether it's from the AI or for anything you're doing, and just for beginners, errors, like if you try to run code that doesn't work for some reason, you'll get an error printout like this. This looks big, but for people who do a lot of Python, they know that sometimes you just get really long errors. So what this is going to try and do, we have this new tool, which is fix error in AI chat. So it'll take your error and bring it to the chat, and the chat will automatically, excuse me, try and debug it. So let's see if this got it right. So it's going to edit it up here. Yeah, it didn't do too well, if I'm being honest. So maybe a bad example. I don't. We could probably fix it, but don't have time for this on this call. But essentially, this AI is a coding assistant inside of Jupyter. It's like ChatGPT. I'm sure some are using ChatGPT. The value here is that, especially if you're using ChatGPT and then a Python environment, what you're probably doing is context switching back and forth a ton. And what I imagine is that ChatGPT does not have all the context on your data. So this will know about the data sets you have. Like I can show a quick example of this. Let me actually open a new. I'll show you a good example of this. So if I open a new, I'm going to import that data again. Fund info. Okay. So now I'm going to tell the AI to, like I did before, delete the region column. And it's going to write code for that and apply it here. Okay, perfect. So this is a good example. So I told it to delete the region column. I did not capitalize the R, but when it wrote the code, it did capitalize the R because it knows what data I have in this notebook, and it's going to write code that reflects the actual region column I have. If you went to ChatGPT and said, delete the region column and you didn't capitalize the R, it also would not capitalize the R because it doesn't know what data you're talking about. And when you copy it back in, it wouldn't work. So you're going to get more accurate context-specific data by using it in here. And also, we're using OpenAI in the backend to do this. You could also connect it to other models if you want. But the important piece, it has the context on your notebooks, your data frames, and what you're doing and the code you've written in your Python environment. Any questions about the AI? I apologize, we kind of blazed through it, but we only have 5-ish minutes left. It's the newest functionality from us, and you can also all download it if you want to use it. I'll give you the instructions at the end. Cool. All right. Any questions generally that I can answer about anything we've talked about?
A quick question.
Yeah.
Suppose if I have 5 files, I have to first merge them, make some manipulations, and when I export them, I want them to be exported into like 5 different files. Is that possible?
Yes, that is possible. Takes a little bit of configuration in the tool, which I don't think we'll have time to show you right now, but yes, you can do that. You can specify outputs to specific files, or even download a multi-tab file if you want.
And I have second question. Can it export to SQL Server database?
Yeah, it can. So so you can build it. Those database connections I showed you, like import from Snowflake or connect to a SQL any database, or it could be a SQL database, could be Snowflake, Redshift, AWS, whatever you're using. You can connect and bring data in. You can also send data back.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, cool. Awesome. All right, let me just put this on the screen. Give me my slides. Yeah. Okay, so I'll talk with Aaron and I'll send you all information. I think I'll probably I don't know if I'll get your emails, but I'll at least have him send out information. But just so you can see, these are the 3 things to take away. Really simple. So one is this is how you download the tool. So if you're using a Python environment, all you have to do is pip install this. This is downloading two packages at once. So Mito AI, which is the AI functionality I showed you, that chat interface, and like the AI error debugger. And then there's the Mito sheet itself. This command will install both of them in one command. But you could also just do one if you wanted. So if you only wanted the Mito sheet and not the AI, for example, you could just do that. But if you want both, then do that. So I'll put this in the chat just so everyone has it. Oops. Cool. So yeah, copy that down if you want to be able to use the tool. Again, it's open source, so go for it. And then the other thing was, yeah, this is my email. Please reach out. Any questions? We do a lot of work with helping people onboard Mito, but more broadly than that, helping people set up Python trainings to migrate Excel users to Python, help people strategize about how to use more Python in their work. I think I mentioned in the beginning, but we've worked with some of the largest banks in the world. At one of those banks alone, we've trained over 5,000 people, so we're used to big sizes, small sizes, and everything in between. And then this is my name. If you want to find me on LinkedIn, I post a lot about Python and stuff like that, but you can DM me. If you friend me, I'll probably DM you. Good chance. I'm avid about who I'm connecting with. But yeah, and if anyone would love to chat, I'll stick around for a little bit afterwards, but I know there's other sessions, but also, yeah, happy to set up a one-on-one anytime and answer questions I need to put a sagacollab.com. I knew something was missing. That's my email. Happy to answer anything or talk about anything you might be doing. Great. Thanks for coming, Valerie. Let's talk. We'll talk later. Awesome. All right. Well, yeah, if anyone has any questions, I'm here and I'll stick around after the hour, but also I think there's other sessions to go to as well. Thanks, Arpit. Thank you all.
Thanks, Jake.
Yeah, thanks, Ollie. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I hope catch you later for discussion a little bit more detailed about using
Yeah,
Python
absolutely.
in Excel. So
Yeah,
I'm working also like that. So we will try to discover the different how can I say best practices between US and France because I'm based in France.
oh, cool.
So yeah. Uh, it's nice having you, and thank you for this session. And catch up later.
Yeah, I'll reach out. Let's connect. That'd be great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. Ciao.